That's why we elected them to office.
Well noted. Because you talked about matters economy and Kenyans feeling the value of the shilling in their pocket. Let's now get this soundbite from the president who spoke in the county of Murang'a on Sunday during interdenominational prayers. And he's called to the Kenya Revenue Authority to expand the tax base, saying that this will eventually help in the growth of the economy.
Walipe kwanza. Unajua wadosi ndio wako na kichwa ngumu kidogo. Wanakwama kulipa. Wale raia wa chini hawana shida, wanalipa mambo yao haraka haraka. Na hiyo ndio itatusaidia pia tusikwame kwenye madeni. Mnajua saa hizi tuko na deni kiasi kubwa. Na dawa ya deni ni kulipa ushuru. Hiyo ndio vile tutamaliza mambo ya madeni. Sisi tutapunguza kukopa kama serikali, lakini pia lazima tuongeze mapato ya ushuru kutoka wananchi wetu wa Kenya.
And here is also what the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition political party leader and the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga said in relation to the government calling for accountability and the fulfilling of the pledges made by the Kenya Kwanza administration.
Sasa wanaongea juu ya mambo ya ushuru. Wakati wa kampeni kulikuwa na ahadi nyingi zaidi. Tunaleta pesa ya hasa. Kutakuwa hakuna riba, interest free. Hiyo bilioni 50. Ingine ya kina mama bilioni 100. Lakini sasa wameanza kubadilisha maneno sasa. Hakuna pesa serikali inaweza kupata bila interest. Itakuwa less than 10%. Ile nyingine ni mambo ya mafuta, bei ya unga. Sasa mimi nataka kupata mimi mwaka moja. Alisema nikiweka familia chini, itarudi chini. Sasa hali yote unaje. Lakini ushuru huwezi kupandisha bila wakilishi wananchi kuketi chini na kuongea. There must be also public participation. You cannot just rise up one day and say you are going to increase the NSSF, NHIF, bila wabunge kujadiliana. No taxation without representation.
And that is the former Prime Minister speaking and in relation to the government and the plans by the administration to increase the tax bracket. Honorable Kagusha, may I start with you? And the target is 3 trillion Kenya shillings. That means the taxman, the Kenya Revenue Authority, has to collect 886 billion Kenya shillings. I wonder what the sources are and where this money will come from, and how will that generate the much-needed revenue in short span of time?
Thank you very much. And as I comment on that, I want to say and remind my brother Kajwang here that the reason why a car always has a windscreen and a side mirror is because as you are using the windscreen to look forward, you must always, from time to time, keep looking at your side mirror so that should you want to overtake, then you're not hit by a car or you don't hit a motorcycle which is by the side.
Which one is bigger?
Which one is bigger? And of course, the windscreen is what we are having now. We are looking at how are we going to raise the revenue. How are we going to fulfill our pledges? How are we going to deal with the economic menace that we have been left in the words of our newly sworn-in Prime Minister in UK, who also says that mistakes were made. This economy has been left in a dilapidated manner, and now we are going to be fixing it. Similarly, we are going to do the same here in Kenya.
Mistakes made by the Conservative Party.
Yeah,
that's a former member of the same party, the Tories.
No problem.
Accused
no
of
problem.
even, and I mean, the Brexit message was not equal and healthy one, isn't it?
It was not. There were challenges with that. And of course, now these need to be fixed. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they have their own way of doing it. And here in Kenya, we are looking at the windscreen on how we are going to fix this. But my brother must be reminded that we are not going to be plucking the side mirror as we are driving ahead. We have to keep looking back and see where did we go wrong so that we don't go wrong again. In fact, we do not only have a side mirror, but we even have another mirror at on top of the windscreen that also helps you to look back. Okay. So looking back is not an option. We have to keep looking back where it is necessary. But more often than not, and the bigger picture is that we are going to be focusing ahead. And let me say this. When His Excellency clearly repeats the message on taxation, I want Kenyans to understand and they should not get worried. Problem with tax payment is not the hustlers. It is not the normal Kenyan. Normal Kenyans have no way, in fact, have no local standard on running away from paying taxes. They pay, as a mandatory tax. They pay VAT as a mandatory tax. They have no ways and methods of escaping or avoiding to pay that. And by the way, they are faithful and they are clear on their payments every day. The problem and the challenge comes with senior Kenyans, wealthy Kenyans, who have the methods, the leeway, the consultants, who they would call the tax consultants, and the ability to, for example, register companies in the Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, who have the capacity to register companies in Mauritius, who have a capacity to register companies and even keep their money in Switzerland. That is where the problem is. The problem is on these big multinationals that we are having in the country. The big problem is on the people who are properly and well politically connected. The problem are those people who have used policies and budgets to take away money through policies from the public coffers in a way that would not be seen to be corruption, but clearly and effectively and efficiently taking away resources from the mainstream government into industries that they control and that are properly well politically connected. That is where problem is.
So the target is wealthy, taxing the wealthy.
Yeah, and I just want to reassure Kenyans, when they have heard the president repeat the message on taxation, and why you are going to see people who are political stalwarts in this country crying foul, trying to use the hustlers as a scapegoat or human shield, is because the news is going to be tightened. And when the tax is going to be collected, it is not the hustlers who are going to be netted further on this, because there's no way the government is going to tax your mangoes that you're selling by the roadside more than probably you have already been taxed. Okay. What the target is, you are a big multinational in Kenya, you are a person who does big business in Kenya, that tax must be collected. And it's very clear on the head of KRA that we want you to bring us money from these people who have avoided to pay tax for all this time. Okay. And by the way, it's not going to be a very difficult thing. When you had the government talk about state capture, and the government clearly said that this time round, there is not going to be personal interest in government matters. When the president says he's going to remove any personal interest from running of the government, that is where our recovery as an economy is going to start from.
Thank you. Yes, Honorable Kajwang, your point on this, and is it more or less an increment or imposition? Because practically there have to be sources that can generate this revenue. And what do you make of how this can be practicalized, the call by the president to the Kenya Revenue Authority?
You can't deal with this matter by rhetoric. Tax is about counting the coins, counting the shillings. And this rhetoric that my brother has engaged in, blaming state capture, blaming multinationals, does not get us there. Let's first ask ourselves, what's the size of our economy? So we've got an 11 trillion GDP economy. What's our tax to GDP ratio? KRA says that an ideal tax to GDP ratio is 18%. What is a sub-Saharan tax to GDP ratio? Kenya is slightly higher than the sub-Saharan, because sub-Saharan could be about 16%. The developed countries are at about 33%, those members of the OECD. So looking at our economy, 11 trillion, how much do we plan to grow it in the next 1 year? Probably 4 to 5% if you're lucky. In fact, with drought and with all these challenges we are facing, 4% would be remarkable. And yet, in that same year, you're saying you want to grow your taxes by 30% or by 40%, from 2 trillion to 3 trillion. Tell us the magic that you're going to use. Don't tell us about multinationals. What is our industrial policy as a country? We have set up all these export processing zones. The other day, the president was talking about AGOA with a visiting delegation from the United States. We want to attract foreign direct investments, and countries that have done it properly have provided tax incentives. Look at Vietnam. Vietnam is now a superpower when it comes to manufacturing and industrialization through favorable tax policies. The bottom line is this: this government must increase the size of the economy so that out of a bigger economy, more taxes can be paid. How do you increase the size of the economy? By spurring productivity. What we should be hearing is that I am going to make sure as a president of Kenya that the fishermen of Lake Victoria can get a good return on their catch. I want to hear the president say that cotton farmers in Kitui, in Busia, and in Nyanza, we are going to revive it so that you can have more money in your pockets so that you can pay taxes. I want to hear the president say that we have already set up a framework for universal health so that when you are paying more taxes, you know that you will no longer have to pay for medication at the hospitals. So my point is this. Let us avoid rhetoric when it comes to taxes. Let us assess the size of our economy and the measures that we put in place to grow it. Because at the end of the day, even these multinationals that my brother is talking about, right now, corporate tax constitutes about 10% of our tax base. The most taxed people are income earners. 25% of our taxes comes from income tax. Now, hustlers, final point on hustlers. We don't look at how we are frustrating hustlers through multiple taxation. Go to a typical kinyozi or a salon. You will find at least 7 licenses, half of them from the county government, the other half from the national government. Are we saying that for us to increase our taxes, we want to move the licenses from 7 to 10 so that we can pay more? Because licenses are also a form of tax. This requires a very big conversation outside the political rhetoric, because at the end of the day, this tax will come from everybody without consideration to their political affiliation. And Raila Odinga is right. Article 209 and Article 210 of the Constitution, you cannot impose taxes arbitrarily. There cannot be taxation without representation, without these friends of mine from the National Assembly passing the finance bill.
Yes, Honorable Mushamba, you had a point.
I'm like, I didn't get to know what His Excellency, the former Prime Minister, was speaking. I didn't get to hear what he was saying. But I think the paradigm shift in the way we are going to collect tax is something that we must think about very deeply. Not as politicians, but as people who really carry this country at heart and would want to provide solutions to our people. The President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, is proposing a new paradigm shift from taxing consumption to taxing wealth. Because for a long time in this country, we have not been taxing wealth. The billionaires of this world, the investors of the tax-free holiday islands, have had an easy ride in this country. I want to take an example of real estate, for example. If we really were taxing the real estate the way it's supposed to be done on taxing wealth, we would not have the deficits of the kind of billions we are reading today. So the president is coming up with a new proposal. He's saying, let us slow down on taxing consumption. Let us increase the rate of taxes in terms of wealth, in terms of income, in terms of trade, as we think about taxing consumption. In the traditional way of tax through KRA in Kenya, traders and businessmen have been the victims of immense contemptuous ways of correcting tax. As we came towards the elections, I don't know whether you know that a lot of businessmen had lost their bank accounts. They were closed. A lot of politicians were also suffering, especially those that were affiliated to the deputy president then. And KRA became a punitive tool. Instead of encouraging people to pay tax, it became a punitive tool that people were running away from. The president is coming up with a new proposal. Let us be friendly. Let us discuss wealth. How much do you own? And how much can we be able to tax from what you own? I want to give you a very good example. Those of us that have property in Nairobi, and say, for example, Lavington, we have plots there. Probably it is developed or not developed. We only pay rates, but we don't pay rents. How many of us have properties that are not being used right now, and you only pay an annual rate, but rents are never paid? If we collected rents out of those properties, that is what we are calling taxing wealth. We will collect a lot of money. And to me, by the way, what the president is proposing, collecting $1 trillion in 1 year, it will even surpass.
Now, you are proposing then that we go beyond the traditional sources, for example, payers.
Creating new windows.
VAT.
Yes, creating new windows of taxation, changing the paradigm, avoiding taxing consumption, and increasing more activities around taxing wealth, taxing income, taxing trade before we tax consumption. That way we'll protect the hustler. That hustler he's talking about will be protected if we avoid taxing consumption. And because that hustler has no wealth, then that is what the president has said when he was in Murang'a. He said, pesa iko na wadosi. And it is true. Pesa iko na wadosi if wadosi would agree to pay tax on wealth.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, and of course, taxing wealth is important. Well, I want to differ a little bit on the issue of taxation of trade. I think on trade, yes, we license, but I also think we need to be a little bit ease on it, so that we can be able to produce more. And I want to give an example of what probably the president is talking about. Look at Keroche, for example, and the punitive measure that has been applied by KRA in the past. At some point, you know, Keroche was employing and producing and was doing business. Never mind, they had challenges with the tax payments. Now, the kind of taxes that we asked them to pay or close down actually were not payable at that particular point in time. And so the only option that was there was for Keroche to close down because they were not able to pay those taxes. Never mind what may have transpired before. But what should a reasonable Kenyan think or do in this case? What should a responsible and patriotic KRA do in Kenya today? Do you want to close Keroche and close down every single tax that was being paid or that is going to be paid, be it VAT, be it income tax from the people who are employed? Do you want to close Keroche and ensure that those people who are employed there now do not have jobs to do, so they can't pay taxes and we can't produce anymore? Or do you want to give Keroche probably a bigger window, even if it's 100 years, in a way that then they will continue paying small amounts of money as they continue producing in line with what my friend Senator Kajwang is saying, that production is important to make our economic grow bigger. Did you allow Keroche to continue producing, continue employing, continue generating revenue? Then give them a longer window of paying the whatever taxes they had not paid, and then they will still be paying now the current taxes. So in that way, as a reasonable KRA and as a reasonable patriotic institution, you continue and you help our country and our economy to continue growing as you continue generating more taxes and as you continue collecting what may have been, what may not have been collected in the past. Now, that is a predicament we have found ourselves as a country. In the past, or as we have been moving on, the institution that is KRA has been clamping down people's businesses in the guise of collecting taxes, and they have used that so negatively, so unpatriotically, that it has kind of brought our economy into a halt. Kenyans and business people actually fear to invest. And if you look at what has also happened to other people, you remember there was the issue of the castle, the gentleman who had to close his businesses, all his businesses in Kenya, and move. It was, sorry, let me correct you, it was African Spirit. African Spirits. The one that was in Thika. That is it. Another brewery. They had to close down and actually move out of Kenya completely. And this is a Kenyan, by the way, a wealthy Kenyan who would have been paying so much taxes, and he was kicked out to go and do his businesses in Uganda, in Zambia. Dubai, Zambia, and UK. Now, this gentleman must be welcomed back to the country. So there ought to have been a window period according to you, and a plan to pay out the taxes as required by law. That is it. Okay. Just Honorable Kajwang, may I come to you then? I mean, let's look at the reality here, because when you talk about beyond the traditional collection points, for example, of pay as you earn and the value-added tax, economists are of the consensus that malfeasance should also be addressed, and that the president should be clear as in terms of explaining how the revenue raised will be spent by the government, therefore curbing on corruption. Should that have accompanied the president's speech?
I totally agree. There are things that we cannot dispute, irrespective of where you sit in our politics. Tax avoidance is a big cost to Kenyans. Tax evasion and illicit financial flows what sometimes is a fancy word for corruption. These are things that must be dealt with. And I would like the president to very boldly tell us how he's going to deal with these tax evasion, avoidance, and illicit financial flows, because these any government must deal with. Even if Raila Odinga was a president, I believe these would have been the first priority. Because before you tell people to put more in the pot, deal with the leaks in the pot. And Kenyans can clearly see that the pot is leaking. Some of the cases that have been cited by my colleagues of what has been called frustration of entrepreneurs, part of it, if you look keenly, are issues of tax avoidance and tax evasion. Every Kenyan should pay taxes, because even me, when I buy a kilo of sugar, there's a tax element on it that goes automatically to the government. But the big guys, because they've got good accountants, are in a better position to ensure that they minimize their tax exposure. It happens all over the world. It is not exception in Kenya. So we need to build the capacity of KRA to deal with that. And I believe that that could give us a 5% or 10% increase in our tax revenues. The other thing that must be dealt with is what you've stated. Kenyans must see the value in the taxes that they pay. In countries like in Scandinavian countries, people pay taxes upwards of 40% or even 50%. Why? Because there's a return. Even when school or education is free or subsidized, health services are free, transport is free, systems work. And so you have no qualms about paying more taxes, because there will be a return up to old age. Okay. But what do we get in return in Kenya? You pay taxes, it does not come back. The people of Gikomba paying a lot of money every year, and every year there's a ritual of fire. Every year there's a promise of building a modern Gikomba. The money picked from Gikomba goes to develop Lavington. Money picked from Gikomba goes to develop Runda. Now, my sister talks about rent on land. There has to be some policy coherence, because land is a very critical factor of production. And if you're not clear around your policies on land, you're going to chase away investors. There's freehold land, okay, and there's leasehold land. The Constitution right now vests the responsibility of imposition of rates on county governments. And those of us in the Senate have been talking to county governments to update their valuation roles, to modernize their systems so that they can be able to collect more, so that they can provide services at that local level. The taxes on land, the rates on land, does not go to the national coffers. If you're going to start talking of rent, then you must look at the land tenure system in the country. If it is a freehold, then no one is going to pay rent on freehold land. So there has to be policy coherence that sends confidence to people who want to invest in land, that sends confidence to multinationals that want to invest in our export processing zones, or those who want to pursue the AGOA opportunities that are available. But as it is, the president has just thrown a number in the air. It is not backed by fundamentals. It is not backed by data. And it is his responsibility to convince the country and not just politicize the issue of taxation, but to crunch the numbers and show us where it's coming from.
Honorable Mushomba, I'll come to you. Briefly, Honorable Moses Kajwang, we all agree that resource mobilization is important to spur economic growth. Yeah. But your party leader talks about not necessarily opposing increasing our tax base, but the important element of public participation. How can that be attained?
That is very important, because our constitution took us away from roadside declarations. When you are the president of the Republic of Kenya, you are different from a candidate running for the office of president. When you're a candidate, you can say anything. But when you've taken the oath and held the Bible and swear to protect the Constitution, you become a symbol of national unity. You become a custodian of that Constitution. And that Constitution in Articles 209 and 210 clearly spells out the measures and the steps that must be taken in imposition of tax. You know, this phrase of no taxation without representation is what gave rise to the United States of America, because they felt that the colonialists were making decisions without consulting them. And you remember the famous Tea Party, where they decided they'd rather sink their tea in the waters rather than have the colonialists collect tax in them. This has been a matter of human struggle over the years, and there's no way in Kenya we are going to have a situation where the president sits in State House and decides that for NSSF you pay this, NHIF you pay this. These must be distilled, brought to Parliament. My colleagues in the National Assembly are the ones who deal with the finance bill, and those in the Finance Committee must subject it to public participation so that it is passed as proper legislation. And finally, you know, the reason why this is important, we have seen even in counties, governors who have just taken office coming up with tax waiver proposals or coming up with new tax proposals. Let me tell them, those are unconstitutional until and unless the county assemblies process the finance bills, and what the president is saying cannot take effect until Parliament pronounces itself on it.
The very... How people-centered constitution is important in a democracy. Go ahead, before we sample the feedback from our viewers.
Some of the things that we must do in this country so that we can be able to increase what we collect from the people through taxes. And I am loving the discussions that the president is throwing into the air for us to be able to disseminate and integrate. When he talks about introducing special economic zones for investors to come in under PPPs, that is public-private partnership programs, through Treasury, allowing investors to come into this country, invest with us, and enjoy some different tax regimes so that they can be able to afford to come, and spur economic growth within regions, and therefore increase the tax base. Because if you don't increase the tax base, we are doing nothing. We may go back to Parliament and to Senate and make serious laws. But without having that investor coming in Kiambu, for example, investing in Thika, where we had a traditional industrial zone, which is currently idle. If we do not encourage those investors to bring the billions, then we are doing nothing. So I'm loving the discussion the president is having. I follow a lot of his discussions around how to encourage investors to come into our country. And I think a week ago, I shared a breakfast with him along that line. And I can confirm that we have a president who understands what he needs to do to increase our tax base. During our breakfast with him last week, he requested us, especially those that come from Kiambu, to identify land where we can encourage investors to come and install some industrial-related investment, including a Nairobi financial center, where we can encourage more people to come in, put up structures that are going to increase the tax base.
Okay.
So I followed this discussion, and I was having a discussion with somebody who works under special economic zone. And he told me, since the president announced that he's encouraging PPPs in this country, they have received requests worth more than 100 billion. People who have written and committed that if that is what the president wants to do in Kenya to increase tax base, we are willing to come and invest in Kenya. So I'm looking forward to an increased tax base. I'm looking forward to avenues and ways of changing our pattern of taxation, taking care of the hustler, but also considering the wealthy and making sure that we come up with a formula that is going to treat every category of socio-economic clusters in the way that they would want to be treated on. And more specifically, my brother, I would want to encourage the discussions around taxing stocks, bonds, and units. Because that is a trade that has been happening in this country, and it is a contemporary trade that is actually working very well, especially with the young people. But it is a window that we need to really look at and see how we can be able to tap income on that aspect of wealth taxing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My last point is... I'll go ahead. I'll come to Honorable Kajonga as well, and then we sample your feedback. Yes,
yeah, I want to say, yes, we are collecting this money, and the president has clearly said that even in water, which is going to help us for irrigation, he's going to allow PPPs, where you can come and construct a dam as an investor, and then we work around how then we kind of tap into this dam and irrigate and produce more. And what I would want to say is that we as Parliament, when I say Parliament, I mean the Senate and the National Assembly, are going to be very keen on our ministers on how they're going to take care of the resources that are being collected. We are not going to be just watching and looking on what they are doing. We are going to be actively involved in ensuring that they are accountable. And you are aware that we are actually changing our standing orders so that they can allow ministers, government ministers, cabinet secretaries to come and answer to Parliament directly. And so we are not going to be joking about this.
Okay.
We are not going to be slumbering. We are going to be, this 13th Parliament is going to be very serious on oversight to ensure that the resources that are collected from the public are properly utilized for the benefit of the public. We are not going to allow in any way resources collected through this enlarged tax base to be misused by anyone in whatsoever way, because we must change the course of this country going forward.
Yes, Honorable Kajwang.
The Kenyan who's right now walking to industrial area to find a job, if they're lucky, is suffering from two types of anxiety. One is economic, the other one is social. The economic anxiety, we were told by KNBS yesterday that inflation is at 9.6%. That's official rate. The actual rate is usually 4-5% higher. Kenyans cannot fend for themselves. The 1,000 shillings that a construction worker makes in a day can no longer feed a family for the length of time that it used to feed the family. This is what should be the topmost priority of the president. He should tell us what measures he's going to put in place to tame inflation. Inflation is not just an issue of natural and foreign forces. They are instruments for managing inflation. And that is why central banks exist, and that is why monetary policy exists. So far, the president has been studiously quiet on the issues of increased cost of living. The other anxiety is social. Today, many parents are preparing their children to sit class 6 and class 8 exams. They don't know how the transition is going to happen. Right now, there's a commission that's starting its job today. And yet, parents don't know after class 6, after class 8, where are my children going? Many Kenyans are one illness away from poverty, one illness away from bankruptcy.
Because of hospital bills.
Because of hospital bills. I want to urge the president that the campaign period is over. These issues of looking at the rearview mirror, as my friend has said, should be 5% of the time, 95% of the time. Let us deal with the economic issues. Let us deal with the social issues that are causing Kenyans sleepless nights. If we want to increase our tax base, let's bake a bigger cake. And that can be done by spurring the productive sectors in this country. And there are many, from fisheries to agriculture to manufacturing to the gig economy and digital economy. Those are the kind of noises we want to hear, not what Kinoti did and what Kinoti did not do.
30 seconds, Honorable Mushomba. I'm being told to get out because of time.
Okay, as you get out, I would want to pick on what my brother has said. The government has to move away from the primary investment role to a facilitator role in some of the infrastructure projects. What do I mean? When we are constructing the Ruto Dam 2, for example, in Kiambu, Githunguri sub-county, where I represent, we should run away or should avoid putting Kenyans' wealth into the dam. But we should provide an infrastructure for an investor to come and invest in that dam, and therefore increase the investment in this country and continue expanding the tax base. And on that note, by the way, I would want to invite you, my brother,
thank you,
for a Ruto Dam run and walk activity to promote the wellness of the community around Ruto Dam in my sub-county on the 3rd of December.
Much obliged.
And I would be glad to see you. I also invite you.
How many kilometers?
About 21 kilometers.
If you're leading, I'm running.
I'm walking. I'm not running.
Can we make it 42?
Marathon. Maybe for the next time, but for this time we will do 21.
I want to do the 42 one.
Maybe you can do 2 laps.
You know, because he knows it's not there.
Thank you so much. Let's now sample some of your feedback on Twitter. That is the hashtag on Daybreak on Twitter. And this is what you are saying. Remy Butia says Kenyans should embrace taxation and take it as an opportunity to play the civic duty of tax payment. From an economic perspective, Kenya has a substantial potential to sustain herself as well as emancipate herself from the burden of debts. Bob Otieno Wino says the easiest way of increasing taxes is by the expansion of an economy, and the taxation of wealth is going to be a tall order considering the status quo they enjoy. MC_Ruma says former president was talking of 2 billion Kenya shillings lost every day. Before the president talks about taxing the poor, has he sealed the loopholes? How can he tax burdened Mama Mboga and border borders only for the money to be stolen by the political class and cartels? Gudi Barasawere says, let those officers who deliberately abused power and privileges of the office they held should be brought to book. Impunity and gross violation of the Constitution must be stopped at all costs. Evans Rashford says, I think our country has politicized all the independent institutions, because how do all cases that are against the President Ruto allies are being dropped, while the cases for the opposition ones are being renewed and prosecuted. Agumba Steve says, the same way the DPP is blaming Kinoti for his woes is the same way, given an audience, Kinoti will blame the DPP. They both serve the just-ended regime. They need to be away from the offices. The DPP isn't clean. Dixon _Oluoch says the ongoing drama between Mr. Kinoti and Haji is a cover-up. Did these scandals happen? NOIS 1 and 2, the Ministry of Health scandal, Eurobond, Aurora and Kimore Dam, etc. Then who did them? Kipngeno Headboy says the government should stop its tax spree. We are presently overtaxed. The priority should be enabling the creation of many taxpayers through such incentives as Hustler Fund, which unfortunately isn't clear if it's forthcoming. Thank you so much for your time. Honorable John Gakushia, the Mokoroini Member of Parliament. Thank you for your time.
Means pooling, actually.
Okay, yes. So it's pooling. Thank you. Thank you for your time. The Mokoroini Member of Parliament. Senator Moses Kajwang, Homa Bay County, thank you for your time. And Honorable Gadhoni wa Mushomba, the Githunguri Member of Parliament in Kiambu County, thank you for your time and company.
Thank you.
What a time to discuss topical issues. And the watchword is oversight. You all sit in the bicameral Parliament, and it's Kenyans. You are just a microcosm of the 416 members who Kenyans are looking up to in holding the government to account. And the eye of the oversight is very important. And that's what the President called for, that Parliament should look over how the government is run. Many thanks for your time and company and walking up with us here on the broadcast. This is Daybreak. The hashtag on Twitter has been Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Social issues is the subject of discussion next up with Willis Raburu, and I'll see you tomorrow morning at the same time here on the broadcast. Good morning.